Straight line depreciation. Straight line depreciation gives us a constant amount of depreciation expense. Each year we're going to have the exact same amount of expense. Year 1, year 2, year 3, it's all going to be the same. Here is my formula. Cost minus residual divided by my estimated useful life is the amount of expense I will record each year. Now if I were you, I'd put a big star by that, or I'd highlight it. So cost minus residual divided by the estimated useful life is my depreciation for straight line. We have an example here. Jed buys a truck. $20,000, January 1st, 2011. $2,000 is the residual, in other words, what he thinks he's going to get for it at the end of the asset's life. And he thinks it's going to last him for 5 years. He's going to use it for 5 years, at which point he plans to sell or trade it in then for $2,000. We want to calculate my depreciation expense per year. So the formula says we start off with the cost, so with $20,000. We're going to subtract the residual of 2 and divide by the life of 5 years. Now do remember that the cost of the truck, the cost of any asset, is what we pay for it plus all the reasonable and necessary costs to get it in place and in service. So 20 minus 2 divided by 5 says each year I'm going to record $3,600 depreciation. So how much depreciation will we record for the first year? $3,600. How about for the second year? $3,600. How about for the third year? Do you see a trend? We can list all of our years right there because this is straight line, which gives me the exact same amount from one year to the next. In total, we have now recorded $18,000 depreciation expense. Have we seen that number $18,000 before? Yes, it is the difference between the cost of the asset, $20,000, and the residual of 2. So over the full life of the asset, we will always depreciate the difference between the asset's cost of 20 and its residual of 2. The next thing I'm going to have us do is down at the bottom to calculate the book or carrying value of this asset from one year to the next. Cost of the truck was $20,000. Do we agree? I'm going to give you a T account mid-page where we're going to post each year's entry and see what happens to my accumulated depreciation. At the end of 2011, we've just made one entry. So my accumulated depreciation right now is just what, the $3,600? $20,000 minus $3,600 says my truck at the end of year 1 has a book value of $16,400. Year 2, what's the cost of my truck? It is still $20,000. Excellent. So if you would like, you could go and write $20,000 all the way over there for all the remaining years because the cost of the truck is not going to change. What is going to change is my accumulated depreciation. So $20,000 is my cost. My accumulated depreciation, well, I had $3,600 at the end of 2011. Let's do a quick review. I didn't actually ask you to write out the journal entry, but my depreciation entry each year is a debit to what? Depreciation expense, very good, and a credit to what? Accumulated depreciation. So each year we're debiting depreciation expense and crediting accumulated depreciation. Well, let's see. So for 2012, I put what, another $3,600 into the accumulated depreciation account. Remember that, do we close out accumulated depreciation? No, it's a contra asset. We don't close it out. So its balance is just going to go up. The more I put into that account each year, its balance is going to go up. So right now, at the end of 2012, I have a $7,200 balance in accumulated depreciation. Let's go down to the bottom, subtract the $7,200. And you see my book or carrying value now is $12,800. Year 3, cost is still $20,000. My accumulated depreciation was at $7,200. I just credited it then for another $3,600. So right now my accumulated then is up to $10,800. Let's jump to the bottom. Calculate my book value. Well, it's $20,000 minus $10,800. Says my book value now is $9,200. How much accumulated depreciation do we have at the end of 2014? $14,400 at the end of 2014, giving me a book value of $5,600. And then 2015, well, now I have another $3,600, gets me up to $18,000. Have we seen $18,000 before? It is the difference between my cost of $20,000 and my residual then of 2. What's my book value? Well, $20,000 cost minus $18,000 accumulated depreciation says I have a book value of $2,000. Have we seen $2,000 before? It is the residual. If we did it right at the end of the asset's life, my book value should equal the residual. Straight line depreciation. Now let's look at some items there. What happened to my cost over time? It remained the same. How about my depreciation expense over time? It was constant. It stayed the same also. How about my accumulated depreciation over time? It went up. What happened to my book value over time? It went down. So that at the end of the asset's life, the book value was equal to the residual. Accounting 101 does not cover this next method, but we are going to cover it. The production method of depreciation. The production method of depreciation gives me a constant amount of depreciation per unit. The assumption here is that how long the asset lasts depends upon how much it's used. Not really the passage of time, but how much it's used. What's the main thing that determines how long your car lasts? The main thing that determines how long your car lasts is your miles, right? The more miles you put on it, the sooner that car is not going to be around. So really, it's not how old the car is necessarily. It's how many miles you have on it. Under production method, we don't get a constant amount per year, but we get a constant amount per unit. Now, what do we mean by unit? Well, the unit could be the miles that we're going to drive that vehicle, how many hours something's going to run, perhaps. So my formula is going to start off with the cost minus residual, but now when I divide by the estimated useful life, that is expressed in terms of some sort of units. If it's a car, it would be number of miles that car's going to drive. If it is a machine, it might be how many units that machine is going to produce, or how many hours that machine is going to run. So the estimated useful life is not expressed in terms of years, but in some sort of other units. Now what that's going to do is give me a depreciation per unit. To figure it for the period, I'm going to take my depreciation per unit, multiply it by the actual number of units during that period then. So if we figure depreciation is 50 cents per hour, and we use the machine for 200 hours, 50 cents times 200 says my depreciation would be $100 then. We'll go buy a truck. Ellie Mae's going to buy it this time. $20,000. Again on January 1st, residual still $2,000, but now my life, I think this truck is going to go 36,000 miles. I know that's not much, but anyway, humor me. And then I tell you how many miles we actually drove at 9 and 11 and 8 and 6 and 2. What we first need to do is to calculate how much my depreciation is going to be per mile. It's going to be the cost minus the residual, the 20 minus 2. This time, though, the estimated useful life I'm going to divide by will be my 36,000 miles. 18 divided by 36 says my depreciation is going to be 50 cents a mile. It is not 50 cents a year. That would be way too good. 50 cents a mile. So every mile I drive, I'm going to record 50 cents depreciation. To figure the depreciation for the year, we're going to take the number of miles and multiply it by 50 cents. For 2011, then, we drive for 9,000 miles. 9,000 times 50 cents says for 2011, I would record $4,500 depreciation. Debit depreciation expense, credit accumulated depreciation. 2012, I'm driving 11,000 miles times 50 cents, $5,500. 2013, 8,000 times 50 cents, 4,000. Did you get 3,000 for 2014? And then 1,000 for the last year? Now remember, straight line gave me $3,600 every year. Are we getting a constant amount here? No. In some years it's higher than that. Why? Because we drove more miles that year. In some years it's less than that. Why? Because we drove fewer miles in. In total it adds back up to 18,000 though. Remember, straight line method, when we added up our 3,600 times the 5 years, it also added up to 18,000. The difference between the asset's cost and its residual. The next method we're going to talk about is an accelerated method. What does it mean to accelerate? Go faster, to speed up. An accelerated method will record more depreciation in the early years of the asset's life and less in the later years. There are a couple methods that are accelerated. The ones that we're going to cover is going to be the double declining balance method. Why would we want an accelerated method? Well, first off, most assets give us the best benefit when they're new. Would you agree? You get the best benefit. So it makes sense that we might record more expense in the early years when we're getting the most benefit from the asset and less in the later years when we're not getting as much benefit from the asset. Changing technology causes many items to lose their value quickly. You know, your great hot computer you buy right now is like the boat anchor in about 3 years. The car that you drive off the lot that's so wonderful right now, and its value plummets very quickly also. All right, so we agree many items lose their value quickly. Now, remember, we don't try to make the book value equal market value. However, we do recognize that many items go down in value very rapidly, and so that's another reason to justify an accelerated method. If we use an accelerated method, in the early years of the asset's life, we're going to have a lot of depreciation expense. Now, in the early years of my asset life, I should have very little repair expense, hopefully, right? In the later years of the asset's life, we're going to have very little depreciation expense, but if you've got an old vehicle, you've got a lot of repair expense. So the sum of depreciation plus repair expense stays fairly constant over time if you use an accelerated method. So those are just conceptual reasons why we might choose to use an accelerated method. The method we are going to talk about is called the declining balance method. Specifically, we're going to do something called the double declining balance method. The double declining balance method gives me a constant rate of depreciation expense. Not a constant amount, but a constant rate. We will record more depreciation in the early years of the asset's life, less in the later years. So we will see the amount of my depreciation expense will decline over time. Here is my formula. Folks, highlight this one because it looks nothing like the last two. The formula is book value times 2 divided by the life, and the life is in terms of years. Book value times 2 divided by the life in years. Now remember, the straight line and production method look a lot alike. This one doesn't look at all like the other ones, does it? Now we're doing what's called the double declining balance method. Hence, I'm using the number 2 in the formula. There are other varieties of that. There's 150% declining balance, which instead of using 2 would use 1.5. So there are some others. Book value, you've been taught this before, but we need to remember it, is cost minus accumulated depreciation. Does residual have anything to do with book value? Do you see the residual in this formula anywhere? No. So this one is really unique because the residual is not part of the formula. So what we're going to see happen over time, 2 divided by the life, we're going to figure that one time and it's never going to change. What is going to change over time is that my book value is going to go down over time. Therefore, it'll make the amount of my expense go down over time. When we calculate the depreciation expense, we're going to take the book value times 2 divided by the life. And the book value is always going to be what the book value was at the beginning of the year. Now, let me mention now, I'm teaching you 3 different methods, and they all stand alone. There is no relationship between these two. You don't take something from straight line and plug it into double declining balance. That will not work. Don't mix them. If you use one, you do not use the other two, okay? I get students who start just meshing them together. That never works well. At the beginning of year 1, I have no accumulated depreciation because this is the first year and I'm not depreciated it yet. So for year 1, my book value is always my cost for year 1. That doesn't mean my expense is 0, but my book value is cost for year 1. Each year the book value is going to change, and we're going to calculate then a new book value. We'll ignore the residual in this formula. However, I'm going to show you that at the very end, in the later years of the asset's life, we do have to think about it. In other words, we have to kind of plug things to make it work. Let's go to an example. This time Jethro's going to buy the truck. $20,000, January 1st. Residual $2,000, life of 5 years. Let's do the 2 divided by the life for starters. 2 divided by the life, how long is this asset going to last us? 5 years. 2 divided by 5 gives me 40%. Now, if it comes out nice and neat, I use a percent. That one came out exactly to 40%, right? What if it had been 2 divided by 6? That would be 33.333333. I would use the fraction then, instead of using a percent. If it doesn't come out nice and neat, I'd use the fraction. If it comes out nice and neat, I'm going to use the percentage. For year 1, now I'm going to ask y'all a series of questions to help you ultimately figure the expense for year 1. How much accumulated depreciation do we have to start the year off? 0. Very good. For the first year of the asset's life, its accumulated depreciation is always 0. That doesn't mean we're not recording expense, but we don't have any accumulated depreciation yet. My book value is cost minus accumulated depreciation. Well, my cost is how much? 20. How much accumulated depreciation do I have for year 1? 0. 20 minus 0 is 20,000, which is what? The cost, right? So for year 1, it's always going to be the cost times 2 divided by the life. Well, my expense will be taken to 20,000 times 40%. 20,000 times 40% says my expense for the first year will be $8,000. I've given you a T account. We're going to post each year's depreciation expense entry to accumulated depreciation. So for 2011, what do? I debit depreciation expense. I credit accumulated depreciation for $8,000. So how much do I have in accumulated depreciation right now? $8,000. Let's go to year 2. How much accumulated depreciation do I have? See my T account. We'll keep going and looking back at that T account each year. What's my carrying value then? Well, carrying value is going to be the cost minus the $8,000 accumulated depreciation, $12,000. 20 minus 8 says I have $12,000 is my book value. How do I figure the expense? Well, I'm going to take the book value times what? 40%. 12,000 times 40% says my expense and will be $4,800. Well, we need to see what my accumulated depreciation is up to. We had $8,000 in that account. We just put how much more in it? $4,800. I'm now up to $12,800. For year 3, how much accumulated depreciation do I have? I have $12,800. The $8,000 plus the $4,800. See why we got to keep that T account going? How much is my book value? Well, my book value is going to be the cost of 20 minus the $12,800. $7,200 is my book value now. How much depreciation expense will I record? Well, $7,200 times what? 40%. Says my depreciation expense will be $2,880. Let's go back to my T account. I had $12,800. I just added $2,880 to that account. Now I'm up to $15,680 is my accumulated depreciation. How much accumulated depreciation did I have to start this year off? What is my book value then? $4,320 is the book value at this point.
Yeah.
How do I figure the expense? I take $4,320 and do what? 40%. It says my depreciation expense will be $1,728. Now let's pause for a minute and see, are we declining in the amount of expense we record? We went from $8,000 to $4,800 to, forgot the $2,880 to $1,728. So if we were to graph it, it's going to go whoosh. You know, it's not even a straight line, it's going to be a curve. It's really plummeting very quickly. How much accumulated depreciation do I have? $17,408. This is the end of my 4th year. This item's going to last me for how long? 5 years. Now I'm going to kind of talk about year 5, so you don't need to write down a whole lot right now, because in year 5 we have to do something a little bit different. Let's pretend we were using the normal method. First question would be, how much accumulated depreciation do I have? Well, 17,408, right? We can write that one down. That's still good. And the second question, well, we can write that down also. What's my book value going to be? 20,000 minus 17,408, 2592. Now, if we were using our normal method, how would we calculate the amount of depreciation expense for this year? What would I do next? We'd take 2592 times 40%, right? This is not the right answer, and I think I have some of this written down there. That is what I would do if it was a normal year, right? 2592, take the book value and multiply it by 40%. That would give me 1,037. That still looks okay. However, we do have a problem. Remember, has residual been part of our formula at all to begin with? No. However, we said we can only depreciate the asset to the point where its book value equals the residual. We can never have the book value go below the residual. If I were to record $1,037 depreciation expense, my accumulated depreciation would go up to $18,445. Do you see a problem right there? What's the most my accumulated can go to? 18. Because if it went to 18,445, my book value would be 1555. What's the problem with that? 2,000 is the lowest the book value can go to. When we reach the point where using the normal method will give us values that put my book value below the residual, we have to plug it. That's a dirty word in accounting. Plug it means I'm just going to force it, whatever it takes to make it work. How can we make that happen? We look back and we see my book value is $25.92. What is the very lowest my book value can go down to? $2,000. To get from $25.92 to $2,000 book value, I can record $592 depreciation expense. In other words, I'm just forcing whatever it takes to make it happen. When does that happen? Only at the end of the assets line. So, how much expense will I record? If we add them all up, we're going to see in total that add up to $18,000. Just like under straight line, when we added them all up, they came up to $18,000. Just like under the production method, when we added up, they came up to $18,000. The reason this one adds up to $18,000 is because we forced that last year. So when we reach the point in the asset's life where using the normal method would cause your book value to go below the residual, then we force it. We plug it. Now, sometimes that's not the last year of the asset's life. What if this asset were to last for a couple of years more? I would plug it right now, and then I would record 0 for any remaining year. Let's move on and talk next about partial years depreciation. Did you notice that truck in example a minute ago? When did I buy that truck? January 1st. Now, does everybody go out and buy their vehicles on January 1st? No. If we don't have the asset for the whole year, we can't record a whole year's depreciation. If I buy the asset on a date other than January 1st, I'm going to have to take a partial year amount or prorate the full year amount. We're going to use our fingers to get it right. We are going to calculate depreciation to the nearest month only. If we buy the asset on or before the 15th, we're going to pretend we bought it on the 1st of that month. If we buy it after the 15th, we're going to pretend we bought it on the 1st of the following month. And the reason we do that is, if you think about our formulas, 2 of the 3 items in them are just an estimate. The estimated useful life, the estimated residual. It seems kind of silly that we would calculate it down to exact days when we're estimating 2 of the 3 parts of it to begin with. If we don't have the asset for a full year, we're going to have to prorate, and that means take a partial year. They buy a machine on September 8th, $8,600 they paid. Residual $600, it's going to last for 5 years. I want you to calculate for me how much depreciation would be for a full year. For a full year. Forget the fact we didn't have it all year, but for a full year. We get $1,600 each year. 8,600 minus 600 divided by 5, $1,600 per year. Can I record $1,600 depreciation that first year? Why not? I didn't have it all year. I actually bought it on what day? September 8th. So I'm going to pretend I bought it when? September 1st. Now, as of year end, how many months depreciation should I record? 4. Normally somebody tells me 3. If they tell me 3, they tried to do the math in the head. They didn't use their trusty fingers. All right, get your fingers out. They're going to give you the right answer. When is the first month we want to record depreciation? September. Then October, November, December. 4 months worth of depreciation. Now, what if I bought it on September 28th? It would have been 3 months. We would have started in October. Again, count on your fingers. It really will help you get the right answer instead of just trying to subtract. To calculate a partial year amount, here's the way I do it first. I multiply first. I take the full year amount and I multiply it by the number of months I need divided by 12 months in a year. And that will give me $533. There is another way to do it. Normally my students kind of like this way better. They take the full year amount, they divide by 12 months to get an amount per month, and then they multiply back by the number of months. Regardless of the way you choose, you're going to get the same answer. You can multiply and then divide, or you can divide and then multiply, and you're going to get the exact same answer. $533, it would be in 33 cents. I just decided to use whole dollars. So 1,600 times 4/12 of a year, or 1,600 divided by 12 times 4. Will be 530. So we're going to have a partial year amount my first year. Why is that? Because I didn't have the asset but for 4 months that first year. 2014. Will I have the asset for the full year in 2014? Yes. So can I record $1,600 expense? I sure can. How about 2015? Yeah, 2016 and 2017. So for every year I have it for the whole year, we're going to record $1,600 depreciation. Now let's see, we bought it, September 8th, 2013. It's going to last me 5 years, which means I ought to be getting rid of it, on September 7th, I would say, 2018, right? Will I have it for a full year in 2018? No. How many months will I have it in 2018? Pretend I got rid of it on September 1st or October 1st. September 1st, why? Because it's before the 15th. Okay, so we're getting rid of it on September 1st. So how many months of depreciation will I be recording? 8. January through August. Why not September? Well, I'm getting rid of it on the first day of September. How do I calculate that partial year amount? Multiply by 8 divided by 12, or divide by 12, multiply back by 8. I'm going to give you the same answer, 1,067. Now do notice that the year we bought the asset, we had it for how many months? 4. And the year we get rid of the asset, we have it for how many months? 8. 4 plus 8 is 12. That's the way it ought to work. Okay, if you add those up, then you come up with 11 or you come up with 13, you know you made a mistake. So, how much depreciation have I recorded? 533, all those 1,600, 1,067, a total of 8,000. 8,000 is what? It is the difference between the asset's cost of 8,600 and its residual then of 600. Remember, in total, we should always appreciate the difference between the asset's cost and its residual. So what did we do under straight line depreciation? We prorated the first year and the last year. Production method, I don't think I have this on there, but the good news about the production method is we don't prorate anything. If we didn't have the asset for the whole year, would we drive it as many miles? No. So the number of miles driven would be less as a result of not having it for the whole year. We don't do any prorating under production method. Double declining balance. Let's do this same example, double declining balance. The first thing we need to figure is 2 divided by the life. 2 divided by 5 gives me again, what, 40%? 2013. Let's ask ourselves a question. How much accumulated depreciation do we have at the beginning of the first year? 0. Now here's what I don't want you to do, folks. Sometimes I get people who go to my straight line and they pull a number from straight line and they drop it in here. Y'all don't do that. We can't mix methods. They don't play well together. They're completely separate. Well, the next thing I need to know is my book value. Book value is the cost minus the accumulated depreciation. 8,600 minus 0 is 8,600. How do I figure my expense? Well, I take the book value and do what with it? Times 40%. Says my depreciation for year 1 would be $3,440 if I had the asset for how long? For a full year. Did I have it for a full year? How many months did I have it? 4. Now we got to prorate the 3,440. Okay, we can take the 3,440 times 4 divided by 12 or divided by 12 times 4. I don't care which way you do it. You're going to get the same answer, $1,147. Now, the good news with double declining balance is this is all we had to prorate, the first year only. How much accumulated depreciation do we have now? Well, 1,147. Let's go on to year 2. How much accumulated depreciation do I have already? 1,147. Very good. What's my book value? Well, we take the cost of 8,600, subtract the 1,147, 7,453. How do I figure my expense? I take the 7,453, multiply it by 40%, and I get 2,981. My accumulated depreciation is now at 4,128. You do 2015. Do we agree we had 4,128 accumulated depreciation to start the year? So my book value is 4,472. How do we figure our expense then if my book value is 4,472? That's 40%. 1,789. I'm not going to have you carry this example out any further. If we did, we'd get to the point where we have to plug it because using the normal formula, we'll put the book value below the residual. I'm not going to have you actually do that then. So what did we have to prorate under double declining balance? Just the first year. Just the first year. Straight line, we had to prorate the first year and the last year. We would only prorate the first year under double declining balance then. Let's talk about revising depreciation. Revise means to do what? To change, okay? To revise something. Why would we need to revise depreciation expense? Well, usually it's because we realize that something we're using as one of our values to calculate depreciation is wrong. Maybe the residual value is wrong. We thought it was going to be $1,000, now we know it's only going to be $200. Or maybe the estimated useful life is wrong. We thought the asset was going to last 3 years, and now we find it's going to last 5 years instead. So we have an error in our original estimate for the residual or for the estimated useful life. We're going to talk about revising depreciation under straight line only. We're not going to do double declining balance. Into my original formula for straight line, I am going to substitute. Instead of using cost, I'm going to use book value. Instead of using the original residual, I'm going to use the revised residual if it is different. And instead of using the total estimated useful life, I'm going to use the number of years remaining. For example, what if the asset's going to last a total of 10 years now, but 3 of those years have already passed? I've only got 7 years then to depreciate it over. So here's what my formula is going to look like. It is the book value, not cost, but book value, minus the new revised residual, divided by how many years of the useful life remain. And that will give my depreciation expense for each of the remaining years. Jane buys a truck, $14,000 on January 1st, 2013. Residual's $2,000. It's going to last for 6 years, straight line depreciation. After she has that truck for 3 years, she determines that the total life is going to be just 5 years, and the residual is going to be just 1 year. Well, first off, I want you to figure how much depreciation would be each year. Her original data. I want you to calculate what her depreciation would be each year before we make the change. Okay? $2,000 a year. We agree? 14 minus 2 is 12. Divided by 6 years is $2,000 a year. Well, we need to know my book value as of when we make these changes. So which means we need to know my accumulated depreciation. As of the time she goes to make the changes, she's had that asset for what, 3 years? So my accumulated depreciation then would be $6,000. How much is my book value then at the time she goes to make these changes? 14 cost minus 6 accumulated depreciation says her book value is 8. Now remember, my depreciation has been being $2,000 a year before now. I want you to look at the two changes we're fixing to put into place and tell me, before we calculate a number, do you think the new expense is going to be higher or lower than $2,000? I say it's going to be higher also. Tell me one reason why it's going to be higher. What's happened to the life? The life was 6 years and now it's going to be 5. We have fewer years to spread these costs out over. The other reason my depreciation expense is going to be higher is, think about the residual. The residual was, what, $2,000? Now it's only going to be $1,000. So we have more costs to spread out over those remaining years. Both of those is going to drive my expense up. What is the remaining life? In fact, you've got to be careful with these. The total life, they tell me, is going to be how many years now? After we do this revision, the total life is going to be 5, right? The new life is going to be 5 years. That's a new total life of 5 years. Does that mean that 5 years remain? No. How many years have already passed? 3. 3 years have already passed. So how many years remain? 2. Now, folks, in the homework, we need to read this carefully. Sometimes they might tell you the remaining life is going to be 2 years, in which case you say thank you, because that's the number you need. In our case, we said the total life is going to be 5 years. You have to subtract how many have already passed to see how many years remain. The other way it could be presented to you was the original life was 6 years. They could say that the revised life is 1 year less than the original estimate. And so you would have gotten 5 instead of 6. And then you subtract how many years have already passed. You've got to read them kind of carefully. So we have 2 years that remain. Well, let's calculate how much expense I'm going to record. It's going to be the book value of $8,000 minus the $1,000 residual. Divide that by the 2 years that remain. 8 minus 1 is 7, divided by 2 says my depreciation for the 2 remaining years would be just $3,500. She recorded $2,000 depreciation expense for the first 3 years. For the last 2 years, she's got to record $3,500. Why is it higher? Well, number one, her residual went down, which means she had more costs that she had to cover. Secondly, her estimated life went down, so she has fewer years in which to spread out those costs. Both of those combine to make the amount of expense go up.